Hey, everybody, welcome. Aloha. I'm Natalie. This is Life After a Cult, the channel where we expose cult nonsense. We laugh at the absurdity and we hopefully unbrainwash ourselves in the process. Now, in Scientology, there is no praying. There is no talking to a god unless your higher power is a stack of L. Ron Hubbard books. But today's guest, she left the Sea Organization. That's right, the one with the billion-year contract, broke up with the e-meter and found something wild on the outside, actual faith, like spiritual connection, grace, the whole vibe. Let's talk about how she went from no case on post, which is in Scientology for staff members and in the Sea Org. You can't be like talking about your problems or your issues or your struggles in Scientology. She went from that to finding God. And we'll talk about why it's the glow up Scientology never saw coming. Thank you, moderators, for being here and helping out. Everybody in the live chat, I see you. I see you, members. Aloha, and thank you for being here. And thank you all for being so warm and welcoming of each other and our guest today. If you have questions, if you could put question in front of it, just make it obvious so I can find it. We'll keep track of those and try to get to as many of those that we can. And as per usual, I know you guys are going to keep it aloha in the chat so we can have a really great conversation. But do share your comments, share your questions. If you're on the replay, jump in as well. I want to know what you think and any questions that you might have. All right, everybody. So without further ado, meet my guest, Jessica LaBarber, who
Hello.
hello. Many of you know her from the chat. We
That's
did an
right.
interview some months ago, and I thought I've been thinking about this topic and questions that I get from people. And I thought, Jess, you would be perfect to talk to about this.
I'm happy to do it. Honored to do it, really.
Appreciate it. Why don't we start off with sharing kind of like what got you going in Scientology and what led
Sure.
to you leaving the Sea Organization?
Sure. So, actually, I didn't get going in Scientology. My mother did. So, my mom and I moved from Boise, Idaho to California, where my aunt lived, when I was 4 years old. My father had been a Navy officer in Vietnam and had come home, and that did not work out very well. And so they divorced. And after the divorce, she moved to California.
Mm-hmm.
So she's a single mom. She has a little girl and no visible means of support, really. She actually, funny story, she tried to tell the judge in Boise that she didn't want any child support. And he yelled at her and said, "Well, it's not up to you. It's up to me. And I'm going to make sure this man supports his child. I don't care what you think."
I love that.
Which was great because that little bit of child support fed us very often. That was all the food budget that we had
Mm-hmm.
in those days. So we first lived with my aunt, and then, sisters don't always get along. So my mom found someplace else to go over in Los Gatos, and she kept getting flyers from the Los Gatos mission. Personality test type stuff,
Mm-hmm.
whatever. This is 78, 76, 78, somewhere in there. Very different era in Scientology than it is today. Every place I went to when I was younger was packed. There was packed. People were doing things. People were friendly. There were kids. There were grown-ups. There were families. Stuff was going on. It was popping. It was the place to be. So my mom, she and I have talked about this, and she felt that she could not hang out with the party people because she had a child, and she couldn't hang out with married people because she was not married. So she was looking for a better group of people to hang out with. And Scientology at that time was not a bad spot to be. Honestly, if you were public, there were many years when we lived a block from the mission, and we were there all the time. I was walking there. I was going to Scientology schools with Scientology friends. So I felt like I had this big community, this big supportive community around me, and people paying attention to me. And that was great. I learned how to take care of kids. I worked in the mission nursery. There were tons of staff, so there were tons of kids needing daycare, and the mission provided that. So, and I didn't have any bad experiences really in those days with abuse, or I didn't feel neglected. My friends didn't feel like that. It was positive. It was community. It was the kind of thing you want if you're a social person. You know, if you're an introvert, you don't want tons of people around, and you don't want to live next door to the people you go to church with. Well, fine, you know, that's different.
Yeah.
But it was good. And then L. Ron Hubbard passed away in 1986, and we had that really weird event where this really young, really nervous David Miscavige told us all that he'd gone on to Target 2. It was weird. It was weird then. It is still weird now. I get the same vibe when I watch it now that I did then. Like, what? What do you mean? The most powerful being on the planet decided to drop the body and leave us? That doesn't make any sense.
Yep.
I don't even know if anybody had heard of Target 2 in Scientology public at that time. That was a new concept as far as I knew. Nobody ever talked about that. So it was weird. It was really weird. And then
you went to the Sea Org at some point.
Yes. So first I went to Flag. I was being a nanny for a couple who was spending the summer at Flag. So I was watching their kids while they were on course and doing auditing and things like that. And they paid for me to do the ProTRs course while I was there. So I spent the whole summer at Flag. I was in the presidential suite. I was with very wealthy people. They were paying me very well. We went to Disney World. I did the ProTRs course. And then I went to Delphi, Oregon. I was actually a little late for the school year that year. And so we weren't celebrities really, but, you know, my parents made good money, and I had sort of a well-to-do life. And so I didn't experience, like, my mom wasn't on staff. My stepdad wasn't on staff. We didn't have lack when I was a kid. So I went to Delphi, Oregon. I had dated somebody at Flag and fallen head over heels for this guy at Flag. And we had made a pact that neither one of us were going to join the Sea Org. Because, of course, we were both being recruited because we're teenagers. That's who they want. You're very easy pickings. And we had made a pact that we weren't going to go in the Sea Org, and he did. So while I was at Delphi, Oregon, in my second year there, I tracked him down and found out that he had gone from Flag, where he joined the Sea Org, to LA. So that's when I decided I was following him into the Sea Org. I followed a boy. You know, the saving the world thing was ancillary in my head. I was following the boy. So I had no idea what I was going to do at Gold. I just knew that's where he was. So that's where I was going. I don't even think Gold really recruited people in those days. They had a very small office at the PAC base. There was like 3 people in there. I'm maybe the only person who ever showed up on purpose to sign the billion-year contract with him.
And based on your experience early on in Scientology wasn't a traumatic one. So going into the Sea Org, that must have been incredibly shocking to you once you got there.
I mean, my frame of reference was Delphi. So I'm thinking, you know, it's just and this mission that I had grown up with a block away. So I'm thinking I'm just with another group of Scientologists, and everybody's going to be supportive and, you know, interested in raising the kids right, etc., and it's going to be fine. I didn't get in trouble as a kid. I was very people pleasing, I guess. So the only thing I got in trouble with Delphi was I wasn't completing my course fast enough. So I got pulled in, and they told me, I was like, why? Because I was actually interning for the guy, you know, who did the discipline. Like, And he's like, you're wondering why you're in my office right now. And I'm like, yeah. And he goes, I'm here to light a fire under your ass. I'm like, what? He goes, you
Yeah.
need to be done. You have this stated goal. You said what you're going to do. You need to be done. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I guess I'll get going then. I had a book report on Atlas Shrugged or something. It was like a ridiculously long book. So anyhow,
Yeah.
so this
You
is what I'm
went-
expecting the Sea Org to be, just another, supportive group of people. We're going to do stuff that advances, the purpose and clearing the planet, whatever. I wasn't expecting what happened.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. Prior to going into the Sea Org, then, because your mom got into Scientology when you were young, so you didn't have any other experience with a religion until after you left.
My grandfather was Catholic, and I knew that my grandfather prayed for me, and I would go to church with him when I visited them.
Yeah.
But my other grandparents didn't really go to church. They were Methodists, but we never went to church.
Sure. Yeah. I was
Um,
curious. So you're there in the Sea
They
Org.
had a faith background, but not one that they communicated with me. My grandfather was really the only person, and my dad.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
my biological dad, after my parents got divorced, remarried right away, and his wife was a Christian, and they got very involved with that church, and that was really very good for him. And so I did have a connection there because I saw him a little bit, and they took me to church and Sunday school and all this kind of stuff. And all I could think at that time, I was about 13, we didn't really have a relationship. And yet he's kind of showing me off as, hey, here's my long lost daughter. So everybody was really sweet and very well intentioned. And I'm thinking in myself, I'm like, you're kind of lying to these people. They're nice people. Why are you lying to them? We don't have a relationship. We barely see each other. That's not really cool what you're doing.
Yeah.
All the people that he was at church with seemed super genuine to me, but I was kind of judging him at that time.
Yeah, that's understandable. At what point in the Sea Org did you realize, like, okay, this is not what I thought it was going to be? Like, when did things start to sour for you?
So I kind of had the rose colored, I'm in love with a boy glasses on. So I let a lot of the immediate nonsense go, right? Where I was staying 3 bunks, 12 bunks in a room at the Big Blue building, really cruddy conditions. Like I let a lot of that stuff go. You're immediately on the decks when you join the Sea Org.
Doing manual labor.
Mopping floors and handling garbage and stuff like that. That wasn't stuff that I had done a ton of. I'm not afraid of work, so it wasn't that big a deal. And I didn't spend a career on the decks.
Yeah.
Some people did. Some people came back and forth quite a bit. My boyfriend was one of those. But pretty quickly they had a need for, we got put on the Mark Super 7 e-meter project. Both of us did. So
the Mark Super 7, for people who don't know, that's just a type of e-meter in Scientology.
Yeah. But it hadn't been released yet. So we were working on a release. And we were in the pool in the basement of the Big Blue building. So I was in charge of all the parts and all. There was like this platform in the pool with all this shelving. And that was what I was first doing. And then they taught me how to put an e-meter together. And I don't know, I think there was a German couple who was running the project. And I don't know if people weren't happy with what they were doing, how much they were getting done. I'm not really sure, but the executive decision was made to move the e-meter project from the PAC base to INT management. And so it didn't really matter who we were. They just needed people doing it, and they needed them at the INT base and not at the PAC base anymore. So I might have spent a month and a half at the PAC base, maybe less, before we were at the INT base. It wasn't what I was planning for. I didn't know anything about it. I didn't know there was a super secret location. Like there's a lot of things I didn't know. I had other friends who thought they were going to be in the movies with Scientology. I did not have that aspiration. I didn't know that was a thing. So, and then right after we moved to the INT base, I noticed nobody was really running the assembly line and pointed it out. And then it became my job. I became the assembly line supervisor for the Mark Super 7 e-meter at the tender age of 16, 17.
Wow, that's
Because
amazing.
I had noticed that nobody was in charge of this thing. So we had sections, we had assembly, we had folks who tested the meter, and then there was one guy who made sure that nothing was wrong with it and that it acted the way people expected it to before it went in the box. And so we kind of we had an assembly line, we had stations, we had a parts guy, we had people putting it together, which was what I was in charge of, just putting it together. I had like 3 people that were doing that, 3 or 4, and then testing, and then final approval, and then it got boxed up. So we had people doing the boxing up part of it. And we were working 24/7, because I think it was launched Auditor's Day of 1988, I want to say.
And as usual, you're up against a big deadline. Everything has to be done now.
Yep.
What were the circumstances like? Were they in terms of sleep and food during a time like that?
Pretty much no sleep, barely any food. Sometimes they would bring us food because they wanted us to keep working. We would go 3 days without sleeping at a shot before we all just collapsed.
And here you are putting together what is supposed to be one of the most important tools in Scientology, their e-meter, and you're all sleep deprived, sometimes food deprived, yet you're supposed to produce this perfect product.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, because the German couple who'd been running the project wasn't there anymore. So there were people at the end base who were sort of running the project now. And I don't know what happened to those poor people. They were older. They were like in their 60s, late 50s, 60s, something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't remember their names. I don't know what happened to them. I never saw them again after we went to the end base. So
were there other things that happened while you were there where you started having the idea to leave? I know you mentioned the boyfriend and you guys joined together.
So the boyfriend was one thing, and things were I was pretty fine as long as he was there. When he started getting into trouble, and then he was RPF'd, so we could not have a relationship then, even though we did. And there was a lot of pressure for me to break up with him, which I eventually did. And again, it was under pressure. It wasn't like something I wanted to do. So it was kind of heartbreaking all the way around. And yeah, it was the luster was off.
Yeah.
All of that at that point, because he was getting in trouble for dumb things, right? Like it's not something anybody would get into trouble for. He wasn't evil. He wasn't trying to sabotage anything, but that's what they accused him of.
Yeah.
And he's just a 17, 18-year-old kid. He's a dude. He's not like, oh yeah, let's go save the world necessarily. That wasn't really his motivation.
Yeah. Did you get caught up in any of those? They would do those like group confessionals where.
No, that happened after I left. I did get RPF'd for fun touching.
And that's a rehabilitation project for us, those who might not know. It's Scientology's punishment for Sea Organization members. It's like massive reprogramming.
Yep. You have to wear all black or navy. You have to run everywhere. You can't talk to anybody who's normal staff. You can only speak to the people you're on this prison camp with. And there's levels there. So when you first enter it, you can't even speak to the people you're in the program with unless they talk to you first. You're like bottom of the barrel, lowest on the totem pole, and they make a big deal out of enforcing that with you.
Yeah.
Um,
What got you sent to the rehabilitation project force, especially at such a young age?
yeah. Yeah. So it was, again, it's later. I've broken up with that boyfriend, dating somebody else. And something has gone wrong in the e-meter area. So they're looking for, who's the cause of the problem, whatever they think is the problem, because you're always supposed to be doing more than you did. Well, how are you going to have more than what you launched for, right? Like there's only so many Scientologists. Once they all have a Mark Super 7 and I'm not in charge of selling the things, how many more can you make?
Yeah.
Right? Like when the market's saturated, it's saturated. There's no more audience to make it for. So that was part of what was going on. And so of course, the handling was to find the person with the evil purposes who's trying to sabotage things. First it was the first boyfriend, and then later it was all of us. And, whoever you're involved with is, just trying to get out of this interrogation.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't really blame people for for not telling the same story. Because you need the interrogation to stop. You'd like to sleep, you'd like to go back to course, you'd like to just go back to your normal job and be left alone would be good, you know. So the current boyfriend and I had two different stories, and every Saturday night the whole base would come together at MCI. It's called Massacre Canyon Inn. That was the name of the golf course that L. Ron Hubbard bought. And so we would go to the Massacre Canyon Inn, which was the clubhouse for the golf course. That's where we ate, the dining room. And the whole base was there, and we would listen to an LRH lecture. Well, this particular day, it's after the interrogations for all of the e-meter crew, and it's been decided that myself and the current boyfriend are the evil people. And David Miscavige, in front of the entire international management, all of the tech people, outs our confessional files to the entire room. If you in Scientology, and if you've ever been in Scientology, you know that is a big out tech no.
Yeah. So David Miscavige
Professional
himself.
is sacrosanct, even in Scientology. That's what they tell you. It's not true. They're going to use it as blackmail later. I found that out at the tender age of 17.
Mm-hmm.
So that was completely humiliating, totally embarrassing, and we were both ordered to a committee of evidence.
So they read
by David Miscavige himself.
So David Miscavige, the leader of Scientology, reads your deepest, darkest, but your what basically you were in trouble for, your confessions about basically doing what people do normally,
right?
with your boyfriend. He
What
reads
were you doing when you were 17 with your boyfriend?
Yeah, I was getting married because I was in the Sea Org too.
But you want 800 people to know this.
No, so you're in front
No.
of 800 people. He's reading in detail
Yeah.
what it is you and your boyfriend did. You're a minor.
And telling us how awful we are. Well, we both were. We were the same age. So both minors. So he's outing two minors for their fun touching to 800 people in direct violation of the tech. And part of me wanted to run up the center aisle and smack Ray Midoff.
Because he was allowing it to happen.
But I didn't. Ray
Midoff was one of the persons. He was wasn't he in charge of?
He was the senior CS international.
Okay.
So he's in charge of all the tech.
Mm-hmm.
And he's much taller than David Miscavige.
Yeah, he's really tall.
He's a tall guy. He's no slouch. He's intimidating, just like the rest of them, because that's the culture at the time was for all the guys to be super intimidating. I don't know why 5 of them didn't stand up and haul David Miscavige away. It would have been a perfect excuse to take him off of his position, but nobody took advantage of it. And I was, young and only slightly psycho. So I did not go running up the center aisle to smack anybody upside the head and say, "This is out tech." But yeah, so we were immediately off our jobs in a committee of evidence. And I went to the prison camp and the boyfriend did not.
Huh.
Don't ask me how that happened. When you go through a committee of evidence, whether you're in Scientology or you're trying to, if you're a suppressive person and you want to do it to reconnect with your family, you have no rights in that process. It is not a court proceeding with evidence and a defense attorney and a prosecutor. It is all prosecutor and nothing else. And you can witness the proceedings, which of course I did, but you have no, other than answering their questions, you have no rights to defend yourself. So what was going to happen was going to happen. And now I'm on the RPF with the ex-boyfriend. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe they were hoping more fun touching would happen, because I've heard that David Miscavige and a few other people get off on reading everybody's PC folders and what they do.
Wow.
So
you run the rehabilitation.
That was the reason. Maybe we can get her involved in some more fun touching and hear about it. I don't know.
Yeah, that's great.
I really don't know.
So did you leave the Sea Org from the Rehabilitation Project Force?
So at the time that I was on the RPF, there was some stuff going on behind the scenes that I didn't know about. There were some investigations going on. I think there were still people in management who did not like how David Miscavige was running the show and were trying to get some stuff done to clean some stuff up that was not right. So there was a guy on the RPF with me, and I think he was there strictly to investigate, because after I was there for about 8 months or so, they showed up. This was right before my 18th birthday, and they said, we're going to move the RPF from the INT base back to the PAC base. And they were doing that in preparation of bringing the kids up from PAC to the INT base, so the kids would be closer to their parents. That was great, right? The intentions of that were fantastic. We all know that didn't work out very well, but way better to have your kids close than to have to try to get leave to try to go down to PAC to maybe spend a couple hours with them.
Yeah.
So basically what ended up happening is they replaced the RPF out at Happy Valley with the kids. So they took all the RPF and put them in PAC base, and they put the kids up there instead. And there were some of us who they had done an evaluation, they had done an investigation, and they decided that some of us had been incorrectly RPF'd, or we had already, whatever was supposed to be fixed, we'd fixed it. Well, I didn't finish the program at all, and neither did the gal that I was twinned up with, but they let us off.
Oh, okay.
So
they probably realized that David Miscavige had sent too many people to the Rehabilitation Project Force, and almost nobody.
I mean, they didn't say that. They didn't say he made a mistake.
Oh, they wouldn't say that.
They would never say that. And I don't know if any of the people who were involved in my committee of evidence ended up at the PAC RPF. That could very well have happened, because they could have scapegoated somebody there. But there was a list of folks that were released from the RPF and released back to post. So I went back to making e-meters after a couple of days. There was a couple of days where we weren't really doing anything. We were just out at Happy Valley taking it easy. Because they were like really ready for us or whatever. And then I went back to making e-meters, and I did that for a little bit. And then there was another push for a lecture series, and they needed tape editors. So they moved me over to teaching me how to edit tape, which is basically removing all when somebody's speaking, sometimes they can smack their lips, or there's conversation in the background that's not relevant to the lecture, stuff like that. So we put on headphones. We had a big piece of equipment, and we, kind of clean up the lecture so it was just LRH speaking and without distraction. And I don't remember what we were doing. Maybe it was the Philadelphia whatever the heck, the Philadelphia lectures or something like that. But it was another big release for another big event. So there was something to sell.
Yeah.
Typical stuff going on there. And then, so you're at this place where the most powerful people, the most capable people are supposed to be, and you expect us to be amazing.
Yeah.
And it's not. Everyone's miserable. Everybody's getting in trouble at the drop of a hat for whatever. There's no recognition that anybody's human, that maybe all the Scientologists bought the e-meters or bought the book, and so you need to find another project. That's not a thing. If your numbers are not always straight up and to the right, then there's something wrong with you, and somebody has an evil purpose.
Yeah, exactly.
There's no such thing as a business cycle in Scientology.
Yeah.
So anyway, another group of folks came after lunch one day, and we would all, after you eat, you get together and you're all in lines by your department, and you have this, they call it a muster, but it's basically like a big staff meeting for all of Gold, right? Wouldn't be any other organization. And so a bunch of people showed up, 2 or 3 guys showed up and did the same thing like it happened on the RPF. Like, hey, we're doing this investigation, and we realize that some people are here and this isn't really their ultimate goal or purpose, and we're going to give an amnesty, a get out of jail free card. And I had been noticing for a long time that I did not belong at the int base. Like, it was never my plan to be there. I wanted to be a mommy. I wanted to have kids. These are the days when they started discouraging that. I didn't know about the forced abortions at that time, but they were going on. They just weren't telling us about it. I did know that if I got pregnant, that, and I was married, they would send us to Timbuktu, and we would try to raise a baby on, $20 a week or less, because the orgs made way less money. At least at the int base, you might get your $50 a week or your $40 a week. You weren't getting that much at the org. So, I didn't think about my parents supporting us. I didn't think about leaving the Sea Org. I just didn't want to raise a baby in that environment.
Yeah.
So, I think my husband, because I did get married, my husband did sort of suggest, hey, maybe we should get pregnant and get the heck out of here. And I'm like, yeah, that's not a solution, friend. That would be worse. I'm not doing that. Plus, I just got married so that we could have sex. I didn't get married because this is, the person, my dream man or anything.
Yeah.
So I had that in the back of my head too. Like, we really shouldn't be married, and we definitely shouldn't have a kid. And that's a bad way to get out of here. And this is nasty. So when folks showed up and said there'd be an amnesty, it didn't sound appealing at first, because it was delivered again with a lot of humiliation and suppression and oppression and whatever. It was not a nice announcement, and nobody.
Yeah. What was the amnesty? If you could clarify, can you clarify for people to understand what the amnesty was? Like, when you say there was an amnesty.
So if you left the int base, if you just up and walked away one day, that was an instant declare. You would not be able to speak with your family or any of your friends, right? And Scientology is my only frame of reference at this point. And I'm an only child. So it's not like, it's not like I have a brother who's out or anything like that. And so we all knew that was an automatic declare. So a lot of people, just stayed miserable, because the alternative was not great either. So the amnesty was they were going to allow you to route out. Now, in the past, in the late 70s, you could route out from INT. That was okay. But in my time, it was not okay. You could not even say, I want to route out. You would be interrogated for weeks. It would be miserable. They would, basically break you and convince you to stay. So they were actually going to let us route out if that's what we wanted. So that's what they were asking for. Does anyone want to route out? Nobody moved. So the muster broke up. I went back to the office where we were doing the tape editing, and I was shaking so bad I could not touch the equipment. When they had taught me what I was doing, they had basically made me responsible for this $800 piece of tape editing equipment. And I'm not somebody who shakes. I was shaking. And so I got up and I got my supervisor and I said, I need to talk to you outside. And she kind of didn't get it. And she was sort of busy. And I'm like, no, I need to talk to you outside right now. Like I put on the tone 40 and here we go. Like, you're coming outside with me now. So she came outside with me and I told her, I'm one of those people. I want to route out. And she walked me down to Master at Arms with the Shiz Ethics and the Sea Org. And I began that process. Of course, they brought my husband in. We chatted with the MAA a bit. He wanted to come with me. I didn't want him to come with me. They convinced him to stay. There was an interrogation process part of this. That was the next hurdle I needed to pass. I knew I needed to say something that was not bad, but that would allow me to leave. So I started telling the auditor that, I always wanted to be a mommy, and my needle floated. And she was not very well trained, and she didn't know that she was supposed to put the hammer down. And she didn't okay, we're done. You want to be a mommy? We're done. So that was nice. Did not have the highly trained class 12 auditor putting the screws on me. And then I think one of the guys from security took me back to the apartments we stayed in Hemet. I packed up my stuff. I went to the bank. I drained half the bank account, all 250 of $500. And within a few hours, I was on a plane back to San Francisco. So one thing that happened, so two very interesting things while I was still at the end base. I feel like it was, and now I'm going to get Christian. So I feel like it was Holy Spirit not letting me touch that tape editing equipment and telling me, this is your chance. Take it now. This is it.
Yeah, get out.
You've got a decision. And then the next thing that happened is part of the routing out is you meet with the chaplain, and the chaplain goes over the 16 steps you need to take to get back into the good graces of Scientology and become an upstanding Scientologist again. So we're going through this sheet that's got these 16 things on it. And I've gotten through a couple of them and I'm like, yeah, that's going to be difficult, whatever. And I have this realization, light bulb goes off. Hey, if I don't do any of these things, they're not going to want anything to do with me. And fortunately, the chaplain was not looking at me in that moment because I got real excited. Like, yeah, oh yeah, no, this is serious. Yeah, that's going to be difficult. I'm going to really, I don't know where I'm going to be working. I'm going to really work on that. Yeah, I owe you a bunch of money, blah, blah, blah. Get through the 16 things, because he had to go over them one at a time with me and get an answer from me about how I was going to do that. I'm 18. I don't have any experience outside of Scientology. Like, what?
Yeah. And it's all of it. It also involves paying back the freeloader debt. So they charge you for all services you did while a Sea Org member.
So I was in the Sea Org from 1988 to 1991, not even all of 1991. That was over $16,000 mind you, all that I had really done is like their program for coming into the Sea Org and their program for creating an e-meter and their program for this and their program for that. I wasn't really doing anything or had the time to do anything that was beneficial to me.
Yeah.
It was all stuff they required me to do for my post, for my job.
Mm-hmm.
16 grand. And I'm not OT anything, and I'm not even clear per their definition. So yeah, crazy.
Yeah.
So slap 16 grand worth of debt on an 18-year-old who's never even graduated high school.
Mm-hmm. So you end up leaving the Sea organization with this freeloader debt, which means you're not in good standing with Scientology, and you're only like 18 or so years old.
Yep.
So what do you do?
So they paid for my plane ticket. So I got a plane ticket from Orange County, California to San Francisco. I had my $250. So I went and got a shuttle ride from San Francisco to my mom's house. And I arrived at my mother's doorstep at 1 a.m.
Wow.
Unannounced, because I hadn't been able to call her. So mostly what was bothering me at that point, because I knew I had seen behind the curtain. I had seen the wizard. There wasn't anything fantastic going on, and I knew I was done. I just didn't want to lose my mom and my stepdad in the process.
Yeah.
So I go home and start cobbling together what my history will be like. What would a resume be? What did I do in the Sea Org that translates to a resume? So I start looking. Fortunately, my parents lived in the Bay Area, so there's lots of like tech assembly type jobs, things like that. So I looked for that. I looked for secretary stuff because I'd kind of done that when I was at Delphi. I answered the phones there. So I got a receptionist job. I got a temp job as a receptionist for Hitachi Microsystems of all places. And I worked at their engineering office, and I ran the fax machine and answered the phone and built up, started building some kind of history for myself. So as far as anybody outside of Scientology, I ignored that I had ever been a Scientologist. I ignored that I hadn't graduated high school. I just started building up work history. I did some sales, admin jobs, some receptionist jobs, stuff like that. And then after about a year or so, I met my husband. And the day we met, he was told that he was going to be moving to out of state for his job. And that was fine with me because I decided that California was not the spot for me. I either wanted to move to Idaho or Nevada, and the state that he was going to for his job was one of those places. So that worked out great for me. And at the time, my mother said to me, and in that year, I had gone and gotten myself a divorce and, filed all the papers with the courts and things like that, and just pretended like whatever happened to me in Scientology didn't happen. And I didn't talk about it. My husband knew that I had been in Scientology, but he didn't really understand it. There wasn't anything on the internet or in papers in those days, unless you had, known about stuff that had happened in the early 80s and 70s, you were unaware of Scientology really beyond Tom Cruise and John Travolta. You didn't really know what that meant. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't really talk about it for a long time. His family was Catholic. His mom really wanted us to get married in the Catholic Church, and I was okay with that. I was like, fine. It's important to your family. I'm joining your family. It'll be important to me. So I did that. And
how did your mom feel about you leaving the Sea Org and then going and connecting and marrying a non-Scientologist?
So she was actually okay that I left the Sea Org because she didn't want me to join the Sea Org in the first place.
Yeah.
And when I had first gone, she started to write some pretty nasty letters. I had to handle her because she wanted to pick me up. She threatened to show up at the pack base, have your bags packed, I'm picking you up. And I wish I had said to them, oh, I'm going to have to go to the pack base and actually physically talk to her face to face. I can't solve this on the phone.
Yeah.
Because that would have been great. I would have just hopped in her car and we would have left and we both would have been done with Scientology at that point.
Yeah. So your mom,
that's great.
That's interesting, Jess. Yeah, because your mom would have left then, but your mom is actually still in Scientology today.
Still in Scientology to this
and
day.
Disconnected from you.
Yep. My mom disconnected from me April 4th of 2020. So for 27 years, they were okay with me having a relationship with my mom. And then suddenly, as COVID was hitting, they weren't okay with it anymore. And it's probably because they want what little money she has left.
Yeah.
I can't think of another reason for it, really, because I never stopped her from doing anything that she was doing. We talked about it a little bit here and there. But we kind of live and let live. That was how we worked that out. And they actually told her that I had been declared in 2013. And when I pointed out to her that they weren't making me disconnect, or they weren't making her disconnect for me until 2020, and how ridiculous is that?
Yeah.
She that didn't really faze her too much. I call her. It's not nice, but it's robot mom now. I mean, she's not the person that I grew up with.
Yeah.
She's not the woman who raised me anymore.
Yeah. And she didn't just disconnect from you. It's you, your husband, and your children, her grandchildren.
Yep. Yeah. And I have a son who's, going to get married in the next few months. She doesn't know his fiance. If nothing changes, she won't know their kids. It's tough. It's really tough and they miss her. They miss her. My oldest son talked to me about it just the other day because my aunt was here visiting, and he was like, does Aunt Katie ever talk about mom, grandma, and this and that? And I'm like, not too much. My aunt still talks to my mom, but I don't get to talk to my mom anymore. My aunt and my mom didn't talk for 10 years when I was a kid because my mom asked my aunt to come in and do some stuff in Scientology, and they want you to sign something before you do any services, basically holding them harmless is what it is. And my aunt's the sort of person, like, she doesn't sign anything she doesn't read, and so she wouldn't sign it. She's like, I'm not holding you harmless. I don't even know what you want to do.
Yeah.
And so then they didn't like her, and my mom disconnected from her at that point. They didn't talk for 10 years. It was my stepdad who would talk to my aunt, and that's how my aunt and I would get together and go to the movies or go shopping or whatever as I was growing up. And then right before my aunt remarried, my mom started talking to her again. No apology for the last 10 years, no nothing. I totally remember doing this. We went to a garage sale. My mom found this giant round oak table with leaves, and somebody had painted it like a navy blue. And she spent months stripping the paint off of it, refinishing it, staining it, shellacking it, all this. And this was a present to my aunt. She didn't talk to my aunt about it at all. They just arrive at my aunt's house one day with this table that my mom wants to give her. And my stepdad and my aunt are standing on the other side of the room. My aunt's like, what's going on? And he's like, I thought you would be able to tell me what was going on. So yeah, they talk now, but they stay off of that subject.
Yeah, and because your aunt was never in Scientology, I could see how it would really be that much of an issue. So at what point then, after marrying your husband and moving away, because now you've got your own life,
right?
You don't have even that direct influence of like your mom is much, well, you did in the beginning. She disconnected like way later.
way
How,
later.
how did you find your way into religion or spirituality or God? How did that path happen?
So the first thing that really bugged me after I left the Sea Org is I had wrecked another person's life. I had got married to somebody who really loved me, that I wasn't that, I liked him. We were friends, but it wasn't, the feeling was not mutual.
Mm-hmm.
Let's put it that way. Um, and so I felt badly about that. Um, as somebody who always, June Cleaver was my idol. I wanted to grow up and be June Cleaver. And I felt like I had wrecked Ward's life, And so I felt badly about that. And I didn't want to do that to anybody again. And also, I, like when I was little, I would talk to God. Um, I knew about God from my grandfather. My grandfather would go out into the mountains. That was his church, even though he was also Catholic, but he felt a really deep connection to God out in the wilderness. And so I had that sense from him that God was somebody I could talk to,
Mm-hmm.
who was a friend, not something distant, something personal. Um, and and I knew that what I had quote unquote devoted my life to wasn't what it said it was. Like all the things that I'd grown up believing and reading about, taking courses about in Scientology, that wasn't happening at the pinnacle, at the int base. So it's not true.
Yeah.
That was the first awareness I had when I was at the int base. This isn't true. Nothing that you guys said would happen is happening. These people aren't even happy.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's miserable. They're smoking like chimneys, swearing like sailors, marrying and divorcing each other at the drop of the hat. They never even see their kids. Like, this is bad. This is not an ideal. This isn't the cleared planet I want to live on.
Mm-hmm.
This is not what I was sold. So you guys are not, this isn't true. This isn't real. At first, you're blaming yourself,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because you're brainwashed into thinking everything is your fault. But now I'm just like, well, if that's not real and that's not true, what is? And so then I started kind of my own journey figuring out what was real for me.
Yeah. Let me
Uh,
ask you, as a former Scientologist, did you struggle at all when you were learning about however you came to learn about Jesus or God or Christianity?
sure.
Did you did you have any issues of being mistrustful? When I've spoken to former Scientologists, often it's not really trusting a new group or a
Mm-hmm.
new religion because of exactly what you just said. I was told Scientology would be this way, being at the international base would be that way, and you found it to be
It's
completely the opposite. Did you have any concerns or worry going into a new religion
sure.
about that?
Absolutely. And at first I wasn't in anything. I'm just, reading books and looking at stuff and going to the New Age bookstore. Um, there was a book series that was really popular back in the early 90s, The Celestine Prophecy, if anybody remembers that. There was another guy who wrote something called Conversations with God. That that was really interesting to me, but it was putting God in a very personal context. Um, so that appealed to me. And then when my mother-in-law was like, well, you know, she got married in the Catholic Church. And so I started doing the things to do that. The priest who was going to marry us actually was widowed. So he had children. He had children and he went into the priesthood after his wife passed.
Hmm.
And he was amazing. He was just the most amazing human being. Very understanding, an actual father, because he wasn't, like he didn't come to the priesthood after, as an 18-year-old kid. He came to the priesthood after he was widowed. He had 4 kids. So he did have a father vibe because he was a dad.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was really great. I had a great experience with him. Also with the priest that did my mother-in-law's funeral was amazing. Um, just really special. So yeah, there were some really good people, really good experiences. Um, the priest that helped me go through all my catechism stuff as an adult, I was what the Catholic Church calls an adult convert.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I love adult converts because they know what they're getting, It's not a little kid just doing what their parents tell them to do.
Yeah.
And so the thing at that time to me was like my meetings with him and the catechism and everything was great. And I was really excited about it. It's all very much Bible, what you do in catechism and confirmation and all that kind of stuff. But when I went to church with these people, like the only people we knew as a couple were the people who did the engaged encounter classes. We knew them by name, and the priest that we were meeting with, and that was it. We were in an older congregation in an older part of town. People barely said hi to each other.
Ooh.
And at some point I looked at my husband, I'm like, church is supposed to be, isn't it supposed to be like ice cream socials and potlucks and stuff? Like, aren't you supposed to be getting to know these people?
Mm-hmm.
And for like 6 months while we were there getting ready to get married, we didn't know anyone beyond these 5 or 6 people. So I just thought that was weird. Like these guys don't seem as excited about what I'm learning as I am.
Mm-hmm.
I think they should be more excited. This is some pretty cool stuff. So once we got married, we bought a house in a different area. We weren't part of that parish anymore. We went to the Catholic church we were close to. There were 8 people in there, and they were all being baptized into the church at that moment. We're both like, this is way too small for us. We can't do this. So we weren't really going to church for a little while. And then we had our son. And he was baptized in the bigger church where we didn't really know anybody. And then I started looking for other things. So I ended up going to a non-denominational Protestant church. Really funny story. So we've had 3 kids. We have our youngest son. He's a baby. And my husband starts talking to the pastor about baptism.
Mm-hmm.
Well, this is a Protestant church. They don't baptize babies. They dedicate babies. So the pastor's explaining the difference and why,
Mm-hmm.
because they want the child to grow up and learn about baptism and choose of their own selves to be baptized. And so he's having this conversation with the pastor, and we scheduled the dedication. We dedicated all the kids at once. We're walking out to the car, and my husband says to me, so how long have we gone to a Protestant church? He didn't for him growing up in the Catholic church and going to Catholic high school and stuff, it was kind of, he took a lot of stuff for granted. And so it was like what the priest had been describing to me about the difference between people growing up in Catholicism and becoming adult converts. They're just going through the motions. They don't really, I'm not saying everybody is like this. Everybody has their own journey, right?
Yeah.
But for him, it was I'm going through the motions and not really understanding. Really, he had an interesting experience when he was a kid, like 16 or so, where he feels like God reached into the ocean and pulled him up and saved him. I feel that way about leaving Scientology. I think that God picked me up and said, hey, this is your moment. Get out of here.
Let me ask you, were there any specific teachings or scriptures that you found helped you heal from your time in Scientology?
Oh yeah. One of the first ones is Proverbs 3, lean not on your own understanding. Well, that's in direct opposition of Scientology, which is the knowing how to know, right? You can know enough to save yourself. That's what I identified was the basic lie with Scientology is that you could know enough to save yourself. Where the Bible talks about, if you go through the Old Testament, there's all these different things that is going on, basically to prove you actually can't save yourself.
Mm-hmm.
The plan all along was Jesus. You do need Jesus. And as far as I can tell, because I've looked into a few different things, and this is my opinion, so don't anybody get offended. You can have your own opinion. It's totally fine. My opinion is that Jesus is the only one who came to earth as a human and lived as we live, and then sacrificed himself for us. It's kind of like taking your kid and going, okay, I'm going to save my neighbor by throwing my kid in front of a bus. None of us want to do that. We can totally understand being on a battlefield and jumping on a grenade for our neighbor, but we couldn't throw our kid on a grenade for our neighbor. But that's basically what God did. And that's like a whole other level. That's how I look at it. That's my only opinion.
Yeah.
And Jesus shows up, and he doesn't just do this stuff. He goes, okay, now I'm going back to the Father, but I'm going to give you the Holy Spirit, and he's going to do the rest of this with you. He's going to lead and guide you into all truth. He's going to walk this with you. Everything else I've looked at, the stuff in the New Age bookstore, whatever, Scientology, do these 7 steps, and then you'll have enlightenment, or then you'll be free, or then you'll be clear, or whatever. And when you get to the quote unquote end of that process, and it isn't what they said it was, they blame you.
Yeah.
Scientology isn't the only philosophy or religion that does that. A lot of them do that. Oh, it's your fault. You did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry. That is so evil and messed up. I've been out of Scientology since 1991. I've been a Christian since about 95-ish. I've gone through a lot of stuff. I've seen a lot of teachers. I've seen ministries come and go. It's always the same. Like, people are human. We have failings. We're not perfect.
Yeah.
We're supposed to have grace for one another. We're supposed to lift each other up. We're supposed to help each other out. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're hurt so badly you can't do that. I'm not the person to help David Miscavige. I'm sorry. I'm just not it. I'll be upfront about that. I forgive him, but no, I'm not helping you. Somebody else is going to have to pick up that cross and walk with it.
Yeah. Do you think, like, how would you define your faith or God compared to how it was presented in Scientology? In Scientology, we were always told, well, there's an 8th dynamic.
Right.
And it's the urge through existence as God or infinity. Right. And as you know, in Scientology, there is no prayer. Mm-hmm. They do one little one they made up for Sunday service just to look churchy. No one says it. No one does it. Right. There's no scripture. There's no prayer. It's not faith-based.
Exactly.
It's not based in faith. So,
so interestingly, my stepdad passed away in 2017, and my mom did a funeral at the house for him, and she invited somebody up from the Sacramento org to come and do the service. That guy was so nervous. I don't think he'd ever done anything like this before. And the audience is my family who are Christian, my aunts and uncles who grew up Catholic and are various degrees of not practicing or practicing today. Some neighbors who are also Catholic, and maybe 5 Scientologists. So there weren't very many people who understood what he was doing. And then my mom asked me to read some scripture. So I had chosen some scripture and read scripture as well. And after the service was over, I forget what the book is, but there's some book that LRH wrote that's kind of, it's a poem about Buddha.
Oh, the Hymn of Asia.
The Hymn of Asia. So he read some of the Hymn of Asia. That was the quote unquote scripture reading. It was just him reading out of a book. It wasn't him talking about my stepdad or anything like that. My uncles got up and talked about my stepdad and, kind of gave more of a eulogy. And then after the service was over, so many people, neighbors, friends were like, what? They're coming to me asking me to explain what was that thing that he did. And I'm like, I'm not really sure. I don't think he's done this before. It didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I appreciate him making an effort, and I went to him and thanked him for coming, because my mom had asked him to, and thanked him for his time. And boy, he could not stay far enough away from me. He was really scared and really nervous. And I was nothing but kind. I was just like, thank you for taking the time to come and do this. It doesn't seem like it's something you've been doing a lot of. So I really appreciate you putting yourself out,
Yeah.
But yeah,
I could see how too, especially not having that experience. It's like
yeah,
that's such an opportunity. If Scientology really was a religion in the fullest
exactly.
definition of the word, that is an opportunity to bring comfort. That is an opportunity to hopefully say something wise, but
Mhm.
mostly to bring comfort and peace to people who are suffering. And it just goes to show that a Scientology minister is not capable of that because that's really not what the job is. They
That is
completely
not what the job
misunderstood the
is.
assignment. What would you say to someone who left Scientology or even another cult or high control
Mhm.
group who wants to connect spiritually but feels
Mhm.
confused or angry or afraid, like many leaving Scientology? I mean, I can't get on an airplane without a fear of not it crashing, but that
Right.
someone sitting by me is going to want to make me a stiff sister wife or join their MLM or their cult.
Right? Oh,
I know,
MLMs are
and
the worst.
I know rationally, like, it's not
Yeah,
like that happen all the time. Why
yeah,
would I think that? But it's almost like every single time. Like, I'm not worried about the plane crashing. I'm like,
right.
"Oh, who's the cult people here I'm gonna be stuck next to for however long?" But what would you
And I
say?
and I have to say that for a while, that was a fear that I had is how do I stay out of, what we call now a high control group? How do I make sure I don't get into this mess again?
Yeah,
How do I keep my kids safe from this?
yeah,
And for me, it was a lot about teaching them um, to investigate, research, actually see a couple sides to something, maybe three or four.
yeah,
You know, I hate the modern society that lives in this false dichotomy. It's either right or left. It's either up or down. It's either in or out. It's like no, there's like five different solutions, maybe more, to almost every problem we face, and
mhm,
you only ever hear about two of them, and they're not even the best ones. Like, what would you do that for?
yeah,
Um, and so for me, it was more like, hey, it's funny because all three of my sons are grown now. They all have very different opinions, and they know exactly why they think that way. um, so I accomplished that part. Like they have good judgment,
yeah,
um, and they know my story. They know what happened to me. Um, my my husband knows a whole bunch more than he did when he married me.
yeah,
But I feel like, I would say, what's important to you? What are your values? And if you don't know that, like if you totally lost yourself in whatever you were in, be it an MLM, be it Scientology, be it Jehovah's Witness, or whatever it is, take some time to find out what your values are, what lights you up inside.
mhm,
What are the things that make you happy, give you fulfillment? If that means picking up a Bible, great, do that. When I first started reading the Bible, I used to say all the time, there's one problem with the Bible, nobody reads it. You should read it. Decide what that was one of my motivators is I didn't like people telling me that's not in the Bible, that is
yeah,
this, I'm justified doing this because it's in the Bible or whatever. I was like, well, have any frame of reference for that.
Yeah.
So that was my first motivation, is I'm going to read the Bible. So at least I may not understand it all, but at least I'll have a frame of reference and I'll know whether or not I agree with your opinion.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
At least I'll have my own frame of reference.
Yeah.
You know, so I have a bunch of versions. I go buy Bibles at the thrift store. That's where I recommend. And you get the added benefit. Somebody's made notes in the margin. um,
It's
there's
already there to help you.
there's
Grab a
actually kind of
couple.
a funny story. There's a scripture that Scientology uses out of John 14 that you will do greater works than these. It's basically Jesus talking to his followers saying, because I go to the Father, you will do greater works than mine because you'll still be here.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people think that's, bigger miracles. Some people think it's greater as in more people doing more things. I tend to think that it's both. But the context in that verse, because they only quote the last half, you'll do greater miracles than these, is that he's talking to his followers. He's talking to people who believe in God. It's not a blanket message to the planet.
Yeah.
At some point when I was being hounded for my free litter debt, I wrote back to the lady who was writing to me, and I gave her my testimony, how I'd come to know Jesus. And I gave her the whole scripture, the entire sentence. I put it in context. And I said, I'm a Christian. And, that person you're trying to get money from is dead. That's the old me. And if you would like help, please reach out to me. I will help you.
Did she respond?
I had known her at the base at the time. So I knew who she was.
Mm-hmm.
I said, if you ever feel the need that you need help or whatever, I'm a safe person. I will help you. You can ask me questions, pick up the phone, whatever. Here's how to get a hold of me. I never heard from anybody again.
Yeah, they might not even
ever asked me for a dime since then.
They might not even have given her your response. I mean, it obviously they dead filed you then at that point.
Yep.
Where you basically kind of just put the file away. I want to grab a couple of these comments. Irina Posner says, in Scientology, you don't pray unless you pray for dear life. When you are in ethics trouble, then you pray to every single God you can think of and a few others you don't even know.
Absolutely. How do I get out of this?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And Professor Kakan says, I know of no couple where somewhere along the line, the Sea Org's ethics machine tries to break up couples. Even happened with non-Sea Org staff and even public. That's true.
They did it to my parents. At one point, my mom went to Flag and they got her to join the Sea Org for a minute. And she told my stepdad that she was going to divorce him. And the conditions were so horrible wherever they had her staying that she came running right home.
Wow.
Yeah, they tried to do it to my parents because my dad had done LSD when he was a kid.
Mm-hmm.
So he was, I don't know what you call that. They wouldn't do any auditing. So that was another thing that was kind of a seed for me in my early life. Like, here's Billy Graham on the TV saying, all can be saved.
Mm-hmm.
And here's Scientology saying, but I can't help your stepdad because he did LSD. So we can't audit him. He'll have to drop his body and wait for next time.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm like, well, then how are you the one workable technology if you're not even willing to help everybody?
Yeah.
That's a great point. That.
Well, we know that
8-year-old me going, something's wrong here.
Yes. Professor Kakan's asking, was Gelda Midoff there?
I believe so.
At the end base.
So, but I didn't really know her. There was 4 guys, like the 4 trusted guys. So Ray Midoff was one, Marty Rathbun was another, and then there were 2 other guys that I don't remember their names.
Greg Wilhair.
Greg Wilhair, and
then the other tall one.
Yeah.
People are yelling at their screens right now. I can totally see his face.
Exactly.
Yeager.
Mark Yeager. That's it. Okay. when I talk to other people, then I remember more things. But those,
Yeah,
and all of them tower over David Miscavige, by the way.
because they're extra tall. They're not just tall.
Yeah, they're big guys.
They're extra tall.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know how, I don't know what voodoo hoodoo David Miscavige runs on people to get people to be scared of him. But if I was a dude and I was as big as any of those guys, I would have just knocked his ass out.
Yeah.
Like, we're done. We're not listening to you anymore.
Exactly.
You're an awful, awful person and you're making people suffer. We're done with this.
Yeah. You'd hope everybody would do that.
But you also understand how beat down those poor folks are.
Exactly. And what would happen if they did? Yeah. Pincha Leslie says, can someone explain to me the emotional side of dealing with these type of people, the higher ups in Scientology? I have ADHD and depression and I love my friends. Do you get to love your friends? Oh, that is a great question about, you want to
That's an
answer that from
awesome
the
question, Pinche.
Yeah.
And I would say that yes, you do love your friends, but there's also this rat culture, this Stasi reporting on people thing.
Yeah.
So if there's any jealousy between people, if your girlfriend got to the guy you thought was hot before you did, any of that stuff, like, it's feeding on the lowest impulses of people. Oh, now I'm going to report her because, maybe then she'll get RPF'd and I'll have an opportunity with the guy. Like, it gets awful. Like, it just feeds on the lowest instincts of people. And if you look at stuff, if you studied anything about East Germany or Nazis or any of these folks who are involved in sort of these more culty places, who are like, they believe it's their mission to convert or kill.
Yeah.
Convert people or kill them if they won't convert. That kind of stuff. When you get to that level, there is a lot of control mechanisms that are being enforced on people, whether it's sleep deprivation or food deprivation or working long hours or manual labor, that is getting people in a state to do things they would never consider doing.
Yeah.
They would never consider doing, because there is this thing inside everyone that wants to help their fellow man. So it's not like 100% everybody's evil, but you can be in a situation, you can be around people who are really oppressive or abusive, and you're just, like Irina said, you're just trying to survive. Yeah. Somebody get me out of this. How do I get out of this? So your brain goes to, okay, well, if I say this thing or if I do that thing, then the pressure will come off me. And at that point, you don't care if the pressure's on somebody else.
Very true.
It's an awful way of living.
Yeah.
It's a really awful way of living.
This is a great question for you from Northern Girl. Jessica, do you recognize culty behavior in your church with parishioners? If so, how do you tackle it? We all know Christians who aren't so Christian-like, for example, not being inclusive. So how do you deal with
100%. So funny story. I was actually involved in a smaller church in my area, and our pastor was very, very good teacher, very handsome, very charismatic man. And we were doing a lot of outreach for people who were coming out of prison. So coming into group homes, coming back into the workplace, that kind of thing. And he actually closed the church because not the folks in leadership, not the people who've been around for a while, but a lot of our parishioners were looking to him and not Jesus. And we tried a lot to not make that be, and it wasn't working. There was some hero worship going on, and he said the best thing we can do is just shut this down, because this is not a game I'm going to play. People should not be looking at me. People should be looking at Jesus. That's a rare individual who will do that.
Yeah.
I think that you do see problems in all religions where somebody gets a big head, and their ego gets out of control and they want to be the man, There was some of the folks in the chat may know of this. There was a movement early in the early 90s called the shepherding movement. There were some churches that you needed the pastor's permission for who to marry.
Wow.
You needed the pastor's permission about what job you did and where you lived. That's insane. That's not biblical. There's nothing in the Bible about that.
Yeah.
There's nothing justified about that. And actually, one of the main tenets that is in the Bible is that man has free will. The reason man has free will is because God wants a real relationship with us. Well, if you can't choose it, then you're a robot. If you're just being told who to love or where to live or whatever, you're just a robot. That's not a choice. That's not a real relationship. You wouldn't want that. There may be somebody you had a crush on one of these days and you would have really liked to have a relationship with them, but they didn't want to have a relationship with you. Well, if you push past that, now there's abuse going on there. That's not real.
Yeah, that's like what Scientology does. Is a complete and utter lack of acknowledging an individual's boundaries or even differences in belief. It is not allowed. You have to completely get your brain and your thoughts in alignment with what L. Ron Hubbard says. And I get what you're saying, because I've known people in different churches, and there's definitely been it runs the gamut in Christianity of
they're all people.
Yeah, they're all people.
They're all people. They all have the same problems that all people do.
Yeah.
And we're all just trying to walk out this thing one day at a time, right? So
yeah. And it's that way in Scientology as well, where
you get really amazing people in Scientology, and you get some real
David Miscavige. You get people like that. The man who made you salute his dog.
Just insanity. Just insanity.
Mm-hmm.
And the real crux on that one is, I thought if I left, I shouldn't be here. I'm not really down for what y'all are doing here. I really thought if I left, it would get better. And it didn't. It got worse.
It got so much worse.
So much worse. They created this hole and people going after each other and hitting each other and
it was so bad.
Awful.
Mock says free will was God's ultimate gift to humanity, and that does make sense.
She's right.
And Mama Opal says churches are all made of flawed people saved by grace.
And so all you can do when you run into somebody who's not quite understanding or not mature in a certain area is just encourage them.
Mm-hmm.
You encourage them, you pray for them. If they're getting it, great. You more of that. If they're not, just be gracious.
Yes.
and boundaries are great.
Yeah.
Boundaries are a good thing. Sometimes you need them with fellow Christians. Nobody's perfect just because they say, I'm Mormon, I'm Jehovah's Witness, I'm Christian, I'm Catholic, I'm Muslim, whatever. That doesn't make somebody perfect. It just maybe gives you a frame of reference for their beliefs, but it doesn't tell you how they understand their beliefs.
Yeah.
I ran into a guy that I used to work with, and the very first thing he told me, it was weird. I used to have this license plate that said walk by faith, but it wasn't all spelled out because you only get so much room on a license plate. And it was very interesting. Other Christians, one for one, would say, hey, does your license plate say walk by faith? And I go, yeah. And people who are not Christian would be like, what does your license plate stand for? But this guy said, what does your license plate stand for? And when I told him it was walk by faith, then he started telling me about his church. He was the only one who ever did that. I thought it was very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And then later he said he was saying some stuff about his own family's history with SA, his wife's history. His wife worked with an outreach, and he said out loud that that's the one thing you can't heal from. And I'm like, oh, no. We're not going to let that stand. I'm sorry. I have to say something. And after that, he couldn't stand to be in the same room with me anywhere. Like it got crazy. And at one point, the owner of the company was like, "What is Scott's problem with you?" And I'm like, "You're going to have to ask Scott. I do not know."
Yeah.
Another one of our coworkers like went to the owner and said, "Can she have an office back at the main office? I've got to get her off property because he won't let me do anything. He just wants to stand around and complain about her."
Yeah.
So, and I was having this conversation with my husband one day, and I relayed what I had said, and he goes, "Wait, you said what?" And I go, Jesus died for everybody, the person who was hurt and the perpetrator, like all sin, not just
Mhm.
the ones you like. And he said, you completely wrecked that man's foundation. Like everything he built his life on just disintegrated in that moment. No wonder he couldn't stand to be around you after
Yeah.
that. And I kind of got a little happy. I was like, well, I couldn't help saying it. So to me, it was what God wanted me to say in that moment. So God's going to work it out with him. I was like, oh, good. I didn't do anything wrong. And God's going to keep healing this guy. This is good.
Yeah. Seems like how it should be. No one says so happy I got out when I did also.
100%.
I agree with that. No one. Well, Jess, I so appreciate you having this conversation. I thought it was
Yeah.
just such a great topic because I haven't really talked to anybody who's left Scientology and got into another religion like Christianity. So I appreciate you answering the questions. And I think the chat, you
Absolutely.
guys were great. And jump into those comments. Do you have any other questions? Maybe we can get Jess to go check them out too. And if I
Right.
see it, I'll try and answer. But I appreciate you being here so much.
100%. Anytime.
Good. All right, everybody, please hit that like button and subscribe as well. And you can set your notification bell to all so you get more notifications when I go live. Thank you, Jess, for being here. Thank you, moderators.
Thanks.
And everybody, get out and enjoy that cult-free day.